Welcome to Imagine Otherwise, the podcast about the people and projects bridging art, activism, and academia to build better worlds. Episodes offer in-depth interviews with creators who use culture for social justice and explore the nitty-gritty work of imagining otherwise. I'm your host, Cathy Hannabach. This is episode 71, and my guest today is Francesca Royster. Francesca is a professor of English at DePaul University, where she teaches courses on African American literature, popular culture, Black feminisms, queer theory, Shakespeare, and early modern literature. She's the author of the book Sounding Like a NoNo, Queer Sounds and Eccentric Acts in the Post-Soul Era, which was awarded an honorable mention by the Modern Language Association of America's William Sanders Scarborough Prize for Outstanding Scholarly Study of African American Literature and Culture. She's also author of the book Becoming Cleopatra, The Shifting Image of an Icon. Her scholarship has been published in academic journals including Biography, Callaloo, the Journal of Narrative Theory, the Journal of Lesbian Studies, Shakespeare Quarterly, Performance Research International, and Women in Performance, among others. Francesca has also published creative essays in Slag Glass City, Bitch Magazine, the LA Review of Books, Chicago Literati, and the Windy City Times, among others. Francesca is currently at work on no less than three new book projects, including a memoir called Chosen, Making Queer Family, which explores the making a way out of no way, present in queer adoption and chosen family, a scholarly book called Black Edens, Country Music and Black and Queer Listening Tactics, which is about African American country music performers and fans, and a third book project on the strange relationships between Prince and Michael Jackson. Francesca has trained and volunteered as a counselor for the Chicago Rape Crisis Hotline, as well as the AIDS Project, and has served on several nonprofit boards, including those of Women and Girls Can, Women in the Director's Chair, Insight Arts, and Beyond Media Education. In our interview, Francesca and I chat about the queer afterlives of soul music, Francesca's powerful family histories of women forging intellectual and familial bonds in untraditional ways, and why giving young people the tools to tell their own stories in their own ways is key to how Francesca imagines otherwise. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Cathy. I'm really excited about this.
So I'd love to start off by talking about your most recent book, Sounding Like a NoNo, Queer Sounds and Eccentric Acts in the Post-Soul Era. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background on what that book covers and what got you interested in that topic?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Cathy. So Sounding Like a NoNo was my second book, and I decided, partly motivated by being past tenure, to write about the things that I cared about the most, that contributed to who I was as a queer African-American woman and a feminist. And in a household that I grew up, music was really key. I would listen to record albums with my dad, and my mom always had the radio on, and it was just kind of the soundtrack to our lives. And both my mom and dad had a very expansive musical collection. So I was really thinking about not only their music and how it influenced me, but also those moments when other music that my parents didn't know or that they didn't listen to kind of seeped in, and how they created this new space to dream up a life, a life in a world. So Sounding Like a NoNo is kind of powered by that idea that music plays this really important role in helping us create the worlds that we want to be in. And that really comes out a lot, even now when I see my nieces, listening on their earphones, and I just try to think about, wow, what do they see? Like, how are they seeing the landscape differently just because they have the soundtrack that they want right now? So I took some performers who I see as coming of age as performers at the same time that I was coming of age, including Michael Jackson, who was really my first big celebrity fan, Prince, Grace Jones, Michelle Indigocello, Parliament and Funkadelic. And I also reached backwards a little bit to think about Eartha Kitt as figures that I call post-soul eccentrics, or performers whose ability to impact people was really created and shaped in part by new freedoms connected to the post-civil rights movement, and like the ways that you could take up space, the places that you could perform, as an African American performer were just different, in that moment after the Civil Rights Act. So really thinking about how that's also simultaneous with the changing lives of African American fans, like, in terms of like integration and other kinds of changes, and even the lost promises of integration, and how we receive music. Kind of underlying all of it is this idea about eccentricity, a way of being and taking up space that's strange or unreadable or definitely queer, especially in terms of kind of taking familiar images or stereotypes and kind of turning them on their heads, making us think differently about those stereotypes. And that way I'm drawing a lot on the work of Jose Munoz, who's a queer theorist and performance studies scholar who is really thinking about what he calls disidentification, or this way of creating new possibilities from what's missing, what you see missing in the world.
One of the things that I really love about this book, and there are many things, but one of them is the writing style. It's very conversational. It has like a memoir feel at moments where, you talk about your own relationship to these artists and what got you interested in them. And I'm curious about that writing style because it's so very different than a lot of traditional scholarship lets you be. Yeah. How did you cultivate that voice?
Well, thank you. That's really what I was trying to do, and I really appreciate it. I definitely feel like with my writing, I'm always kind of attempting to build more of a voice. But when I began writing, my dissertation, which was actually on Shakespeare and race, I really was interested in trying to bring together my academic self with the rest of my life. And I really wanted a kind of academic career that let me be my full self. And that was kind of hard, as a graduate student and as an untenured person, but it's become easier, I think, over time, just jumping through the hoops of tenure. So, but I always had this vision that I would love to write books that my grandmother would like. And my grandmother, who is no longer with us, but was born in the 1920s, really intelligent, really excited about the world, but mostly self-taught. Like I don't think she finished high school, but she did some high school. She was a janitor for Chicago Public Schools. And every summer when she would clean up the lockers, she would do what she called liberating books. She would take books home and along with like socks and gym shoes and all kinds of things that we loved. And she would distribute them with all of us. And then eventually some of my sister and my cousins got to go with her to clean, and we'd also liberate things. But anyway, she was really interested in books and reading and ideas. And, I remember her having Grey's Anatomy, the book. Whenever something was wrong, she would consult her books and try to figure it out. And I really saw her as kind of like my intellectual inspiration, even though she didn't go to college. And so, yeah, my vision really was to write something for her. And I don't know if I've accomplished it. I'm not sure if she would be that interested or, if she would get it. But I did get a chance to share my first book with her. And she was just so proud that it was hard to tell, if she enjoyed it. But she just seemed really excited that I had a book at all. And I had Elizabeth Taylor on the cover. Cultivating the writing style has meant really trying to read widely, reading outside of academia and, like pop culture scholars are already bringing their nerdy skills to things that aren't usually thought of as academic. So really working on that. There's some writers who I really enjoy reading that I model myself on too. Like I love the work of Daphne Brooks, who is an American Studies scholar, performance studies scholar I think she's at Yale. And she's also a professional music writer as well. To me, it feels like she's really able to talk intelligently about popular culture and talk about theory in ways that feels just very real and vital. I also think that teaching at DePaul has helped my writing a lot because we have very intelligent, very strong students, but not always students who are, since we're not an Ivy League school, some of our students are learning how to become college students. They might not necessarily be shaped in the same ways that some students are who come from more elite backgrounds or go to more elite schools, to know what to do. And so I had to learn how to get across the ideas that I wanted to in ways that were engaging and accessible. And so I think it's just changed, it's affected my writing as well. I've also, I remember once reading an interview with Octavia Butler about her own career as a science fiction writer. And she also, for the most part, was self-taught. And she said that one thing that she's done to become a better writer is to take any class that's free that comes her way. And there aren't that many free classes these days, but I do take classes occasionally on creative writing at Story Studio, which is a kind of non-academic creative writing space with professional writers teaching. And, I'm always trying to teach myself how to write new things. Like after finishing Sounding Like a NoNo, I realized I really wanted to write a memoir. So I'm working on a memoir on the adoption of my daughter, Cece, and kind of the notion of queer family across different generations in my family. And I have a novel that I'm thinking about as well. And, just always thinking about, what are the tools that I need to tell the stories that I want to tell, and trying not to feel bound in by discipline or by forms.
A lot of this work, this kind of more creative work or public scholarship, you do a really good job of publishing in a huge variety of locations, which is actually how I originally came across your work. And I'm always kind of struck by how you weave together the intellectual with the popular, or the kind of personal with the scholarly. It's a hard weave, and you do it so elegantly, and it's really impressive. And I'm curious about how you find different ways to speak to different audiences. You mentioned a little bit with your students, but I'm thinking for your public scholarship, the work you do for Bitch Magazine or the LA Review of Books. Obviously, the people who read that is a much wider number of people and a much more diverse group of people than the people who read academic journals, let's be honest. Do you find that conceptualizing those audiences requires you to do a different kind of writing style?
Yeah, I do think that that's true. And, in a way, it's about confidence, like having the courage of my convictions as a writer, because I really think that often in scholarship, we're encouraged, we are required to, show all the breadcrumbs of our thinking, to show, how we're engaging with other thinkers. And there's a kind of genealogical work or even archival work that accompanies a scholarly essay. And some of that, I think, does the work of demonstrating your skill and confidence. But with larger audiences, there are other tools for showing confidence. And some of it has to do with taking on pressing issues in a way that gives a new angle, creating a voice that feels authentic and knowledgeable, but also conversational. And it's really also like creating a voice that shows respect for your audience in all of its diversity. So I really try to develop that. And I guess I also try to sound more like myself, to kind of recognize myself in my writing. One thing that really helped me in feeling more confident and also just finding places to publish was that I took a great seminar run by the Op-Ed Project, which was visiting DePaul and doing work with us. The aim of the Op-Ed Project is to diversify voices on opinion pages and other places, especially thinking about women and underrepresented groups and queer people. And so I really learned how to pitch an idea, how to, write a lead, how to keep my writing short. And that's something that is my biggest challenge. I tend to overwrite, and I'm always having to edit for word counts, just to kind of say what you mean right away, but also in a fresh way. So we also got advice in terms of pitching things locally as well as nationally. And that was how I kind of started the relationship with Bitch Media. And so I really encourage people to seek out that workshop or others like it that give you a chance to really get engaged with public conversations about things that you care about. For a little while, I had a column with the Windy City Times, which is Chicago's LGBTQ newspaper. It comes out every week. And my column was kind of taking a queer eye to really anything that I thought about. So I wrote about creative crushes. I wrote about the legacy of Nelson Mandela. I, wrote about Glee. I think I wrote about Glee at one point. Writing for that paper was another great experience. And it was really from there that I got the opportunity to also publish with LA Review of Books. I'm also trying to get involved in creative writing, publishing more. Part of my plan is to also go to creative writing conferences like the AWP or Nonfiction Now, just to kind of meet and hear different voices and learn different styles.
Can you maybe talk about some of those creative writing projects that you're working on, if they're at a point where you're willing to share at least?
Well, I'm pretty knee deep in my memoir, which is called Chosen: Making Queer Family. And in that memoir, it really partly kind of talks about my experience of motherhood late in life as, a Black queer woman living in Chicago, and also as part of an interracial couple, lesbian couple. So it's partly about the ways that we somewhat intentionally try to create a different relationship to mothering, shaped by really raising an African American girl in this current moment, political moment. And as I've been writing it, I've also thought about how a lot of African American families, maybe all of them, are queer in the ways that we often have to invent new methods or kind of take indirect routes to get what we need and to live full lives. And so I really thought about my great-grandmother who ran a boarding house in Chicago in Bronzeville in the 1930s and 40s. And kind of used that as a way of kind of holding on to this land and kind of struggled back and forth with the bank. And in my mother's own writing, she talks about the presence of people who also lived in the house who weren't blood family. And even though my mother wouldn't have probably described herself as queer, I think that there's a kind of openness and flexibility, especially in terms of community and friendship, that she taught me that was part of this experience with my great-grandmother. So I try to look at other moments as well in the past where I feel myself drawing from these basic aesthetics. And then also in the memoir, I'm really thinking about the ways that adoption is part of a history of loss, whether it's kind of the larger history of African Americans and chattel slavery and just the racial dynamics that we still inherit, but also the ways that economics, which were also part of Cece's adoption story and kind of economic need, comes in, and how even as I experience the joy of, having this life that I'm helping raise, I'm also really aware of the loss of this other family that I don't know. And that I think that awareness links me to Black people in general. So as I'm thinking about adoption and mothering, I'm also thinking about how it's changed my relationship to my own Blackness and kind of my sense of responsibility. So that's the memoir, and I hope to have it done in the next few weeks, actually. And
oh, wow, out. That's awesome.
I hope so. I mean, I might be naive, but I've never published a memoir, so we'll see. And then I do have also a novel idea based on my younger self. My first job was in Pennsylvania at Penn State. And I was single and for a long time, the only Black person of my friends. I had a few colleagues, but my circle was pretty homogenous. And I think my experience of living in the town and State College and kind of learning about the area was definitely shaped by my identity. And in those years, I really went on a lot of exploratory drives, and I really love antique stores. So I would go to a lot of those, and I kept finding evidence of Black lives that weren't there anymore. And it really made me think about what I know is true of a lot of places in the United States where Black people have lived and owned property and really been forced to leave. And so really thinking about the traces of Blackness. So I'm kind of interested in that experience, but through a fictionalized experience, how a character who can be lost in a social situation that's somewhat isolating, but also, how place can sometimes exacerbate that isolation, but also create a sense of grounding or the sense of possibility. Just when I started really working on the novel, Spike Lee's film Black Klansman started being advertised. And I thought, wow, okay, Spikester and I are thinking about the same thing, which is how do we as Black people, how are we in conversation with forms of whiteness that sometimes seek our own obliteration? Because I think that that is part of the isolation that I felt in that moment. Sometimes people of color are forced to have conversations and to kind of create a relationship where often it isn't reciprocated, that sense of the need to reach across political and racial lines. Most of us, if we're successful, have had to do that and learn those skills. And so just thinking about, what's the psychic cost?
So I know you're also working on this project about country music, right? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah, that's my next scholarly project on music is looking at African-American country music fans and performers. And in it, I'm really thinking about, sort of historically the vexed relationship between African-Americans and country, really kind of making the argument that country music's Black roots have been erased for very concrete reasons. But despite that, kind of thinking of the relationship between the blues, country blues, old time music, earlier in the century, and the ways that the music industry, as well as particular people, have kind of shaped the ways that we think about country and the sounds of country as white. That's kind of the backdrop for thinking about particular artists right now who are negotiating that history to create new sounds and music within the genre of country. So in the book, I'm thinking about Valerie June, Rhiannon Giddens and the Carolina Chocolate Drops, Amethyst Kaya, who's an amazing performer out of Chattanooga, Tennessee, and the ways that, especially there seems to be a very strong historic turn in their music, really trying to recover lost histories in their performances. So it's a project that I'm really excited about and hope to have finished in the next year or so.
Are you a musician at all yourself?
I am. I'm not a very good musician, but after childhood of piano lessons and violin and viola, I more recently as an adult took up the bass, the upright bass, and I'm just learning how to play with other people, and so I'm a little rusty, but I think that it does help me in my writing about music to know some of those fundamentals, and also kind of to just have glimpses at the joy of creating music, which only happens every once in a while before I kind of lose my beat and then I, fail. But yeah, I'm fascinated with playing music. I have some ukuleles and harmonicas also, and I'm trying to work on my whistling skills. So, I've always loved music. I have a terrible singing voice, so I try to stay engaged in making music, however amateurishly, through whatever means I can.
I'm curious how you see your work in both these kind of more creative areas, but also your scholarship and the other kind of projects you're involved in, how you see them as bringing together an interest in academia, in art or creativity, and how you connect those to your kind of commitment to social justice activism or social change.
Oh, great. Yeah, thank you for that question. One of the exciting things about being in Chicago is that there are so many great projects happening. Soon after I moved here, I got involved in Women in the Director's Chair, and also a project called Beyond Media Education, which was about bringing the tools of filmmaking, in this case, video making, to all kinds of young people to tell their stories. And so in that experience, I got to learn about the power of having access to multiple tools of expression for young people, for folks of color, for working class people, queer people, differently abled people. And those stories are so valuable. So the activism that I've been involved in is often really around helping share tools so that people, especially young people, can talk about issues that matter to them, and also maybe to imagine new possibilities. Right now, my current activism is really around this group that my partner Annie and I started called Girls on Fire. It was formed just by members of our community and folks at our daughter's school who noticed low self-esteem in terms of our daughters, in terms of their Blackness, really trying to think about how to create community and connection and feed their sense of self. And we don't always talk about race, but sometimes we're talking about self-defense, or we're talking about creativity, or, our last meeting, we visited an artist studio, and the grandmother of one of the girls talked about what it's like to be an artist, just so that they have a way of imagining themselves. I guess a theme for the activism that I've been involved in is really around storytelling and access, and trying to create a sense of openness in terms of possibilities for the future.
So this brings me to my last and my absolute favorite question that I get to talk with really smart people about, like yourself, which is what all of this kind of adds up to for you, the big why behind why you do all the projects that you do. And that's that version of a better world that you're trying to make in the process of doing these kinds of projects. What kind of world are you working towards? What kind of world do you want?
Well, in just a really fundamental sense, I would love to have a world where everyone can be their full selves, whoever they are, in terms of sexuality, race, gender, in terms of ideas, creativity, other skills, like being able to just fully occupy public space safely, to have basic needs, food, education, housing, a sense of being able to move freely. And then to just fully be themselves. Writing is, for me, a way of imagining that world, because it's what makes me happy. And teaching and writing, I feel so lucky to have discovered them, because I feel excited every day. And I've realized that for structural reasons, or just access reasons, or other reasons, not a lot of people live their lives content with what they're doing. So, I really would love a world where everyone was free to really seek the things that made them fully happy. And there's so many reasons, whether it's hunger or, policing, or all these other things that keep people from fully becoming who they could be. And that's the world that I would love. I mean, also, I would love the earth to continue, and
it would be nice. It would be nice. Yes.
So, that sense of fullness, whatever it means for each of us, I think is my goal.
Well, thank you so much for being with us and sharing your version of imagining otherwise.
Thank you so much, Cathy. It's a joy.